Hi, I'm Deborah. My parents threw my suitcase on the front lawn and screamed, "Leave the keys and go!" That same afternoon, the bank called me the legal owner of the house. And a week later, those same parents who erased me from the dinner table, who told neighbors I'd lost my mind, came back asking if they could stay. But it wasn't just the eviction that broke me, it was the years of fake concern. The paperwork I signed when I still trusted them. The voice message I was never supposed to hear. What kind of family plans your erasure in advance, while smiling at your birthday? And if they could steal my home, what else were they willing to take? It was late October in Fort Collins, the kind of morning that carried more silence than chill. The sky hadn't quite decided if it wanted to be gray or blue, and the air had that heavy feel, like a conversation waiting to turn uncomfortable. I had been up since 5. I wiped down the counters again, even though I'd already cleaned them twice the night before. I aligned the napkins just right, folded the way Mom used to show me when we had Sunday dinners as a kid. It had been a long time since I set a table for them, but I still remembered which side the fork went on. It wasn't about the meal. It wasn't even about the house. It was about them seeing me, maybe for the first time, without trying to change the lens. By 10, I'd lit the last candle on the console table and smoothed the throw pillows one more time. I stood in the kitchen, hands resting on the edge of the counter, telling myself, they'll see it. They'll see me. They pulled up right before noon. I saw their car from the kitchen window. Same dull gold SUV, same sticker from the church they hadn't attended in years. I adjusted my sweater, took a breath, then another, but they didn't knock. Instead, I heard the slam of a car door, then another. By the time I got to the front door, Mom was already halfway up the steps, dragging my old green suitcase, the one I took to college. I stepped out, still holding the towel I'd used to wipe the glasses. She didn't say hello, didn't even look at me. "Leave the keys, Deborah," she said, not yelling, but loud enough for the neighbor 2 lawns over to glance up from her garden clippers. What? The word barely formed in my throat. Dad walked past me like I wasn't even there. He didn't meet my eyes. He headed straight to the porch table and looked at the key ring I'd left beside the candles. "It was never yours," Mom said, as if she were finishing a sentence I hadn't heard the first part of. She dropped the suitcase, hard. The zipper slid open, revealing my work flats and a stack of folders I kept in my home office. A piece of lined paper fluttered out onto the steps. She didn't pick it up. "Wait, what are you doing?" My voice cracked, but I didn't raise it. I couldn't. "You're not stable enough to manage this kind of responsibility," Dad finally spoke. "We've decided, this house, this family home, is going back under our care." I stood still, not frozen, just locked in place. Neighbors were watching now, not openly, not rudely, but enough glances to know the scene had an audience. "You told people I could stay here," I managed to say. Mom turned, slow and deliberate. "That was before you started shutting us out, before you decided you didn't need family." My stomach tightened. I felt the heat rise to my ears, but I stayed quiet. I knelt down, gathered the folder and the shoe that had fallen out. My fingers trembled. The paper had a faint coffee stain in the corner. They didn't yell again. They didn't have to. The message was clear. I picked up the house keys, ones I had polished that morning because for a split second I thought today might matter, and set them on the porch beside the lantern. Dad didn't even glance at me. Mom turned her back before I stood. As I walked toward my car, I heard her voice, quiet but perfectly audible. "We gave her everything. She just couldn't handle it. So sad, really." I didn't flinch. I didn't spin around with a speech. I just opened my door, tossed the suitcase in the back, and sat down behind the wheel. A dog barked in the distance. A truck passed slowly. I looked in the rearview mirror, not at the house but at myself. No tears came. No shaking. Just that throb behind my eyes and the tight coil in my chest that had been there since I was 12. Maybe I was never meant to belong here. Maybe I was always just a placeholder until they decided who really deserved to take up space. I started the engine. The house sat behind me like a sealed envelope, and I drove, unsure where to go. Just forward, just away. I didn't scream, I didn't beg. I just drove. But the phone call waiting for me an hour later, it changed everything. I'd been driving for maybe 20 minutes when I realized I hadn't chosen a direction, just avoided home. Not that it was mine anymore, not in the way it should have been. I ended up pulling into a gas station near the edge of town, the kind of place with flickering lights and stale coffee, a place no one asked questions. The moment I killed the engine, my phone lit up on the passenger seat. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. But something in me knew this wasn't a telemarketer. "Hello?" I answered, my voice flatter than usual. "Hi, is this Ms. Deborah Whitmore?" The voice on the other end was cheery, too cheery. "This is Alexis from Midwestern Mortgage. I hope I didn't catch you at a bad time." That phrase, not "how are you?" Not "is everything all right?" Just, "I hope I didn't inconvenience you." I swallowed the laugh that almost escaped. "What's this regarding?" "There's been a recent attempt to make changes to your mortgage account," she said. We wanted to confirm before anything proceeded. My fingers tightened around the phone. What kind of changes? Well, there was a request to add co-owners to your deed and to change your mailing address, but the form was incomplete, and it didn't come through our secure portal. We flagged it as suspicious. I stared at the windshield, at the gas pump flickering under a buzzing light. "I didn't authorize any changes," I said. "That's what we thought." "You're still the sole owner on record, and no other party has access or authority. We've locked your file for now, just to be safe. Would you like us to email confirmation?" "Yes," I said, almost before she finished. "Send everything, every request, every flag, all of it." "Of course. I'm sorry you had to deal with this." I ended the call, then sat in silence. Not the kind of silence that comes with shock, but the kind that arrives when you realize something. They didn't just kick me out. They tried to erase me, quietly, strategically, legally. I booked a motel room 2 exits down the highway. Nothing fancy. Floral curtains, a humming mini fridge, and that smell of industrial cleaner that never quite fades. It was past dusk now. My phone was at 8% and still buzzing. I turned it over, a text from Mom. "We didn't mean it like that. You're still our daughter. Can we talk?" My chest tightened, not from sadness, but from the sheer audacity. Then, 2 minutes later, another. "We can't stay in our place much longer. We thought, maybe we could stay at yours, just for now." At mine, the house they threw me out of, the one they tried to steal on paper, the one I scrubbed every corner of while imagining a family dinner that would finally feel like a homecoming. I dropped the phone onto the bedspread. The room buzzed with the quiet hum of the AC unit cycling on. I didn't reply. An hour later, I checked my voicemail. There was a new one from Mom. I hesitated, then hit play. Her voice was softer now, rehearsed. "We know you've got space. Ryan's been looking at the basement, you know, to fix it up. We wouldn't be a bother. And you always wanted to be needed, Deborah." Needed. That was the word she reached for. Not loved, not missed, needed, like a spare key, like a tool. I played the message twice, not because I didn't hear it, but because I needed the reminder. This wasn't grief. This wasn't a rift caused by misunderstanding. This was calculation. I sat down on the floor, my back against the foot of the bed. I didn't cry. Instead, I pulled my laptop out from my bag, plugged it in, let it boot. One by one, I opened the folders, digital copies of my mortgage documents, title deeds, purchase confirmations. I created a new one. Legal, Deborah, primary. Inside it, I started dragging everything I'd need. Deed file, check. Purchase proof, check. Scanned ID, check. Every email, every note, every line that bore my name, not theirs. I didn't slam a door. I didn't raise a voice. But I was done waiting for someone to let me back in. They didn't evict me from a home. They declared war on my right to belong. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had already moved in. That thought sat heavy on my chest as I idled across the street from my own house, watching someone else's curtains flutter in the living room window. Pale blue, not mine. I used to hang cream ones with a soft pattern, ones I picked with care, lining them myself because I couldn't find the right length. Now they were gone, like I never touched the space at all. A sedan I didn't recognize sat in the driveway. There was a baby sunshade in the back window and a coffee cup on the dash. The blinds in the bedroom I once called mine were pulled all the way down, even though the sun had barely risen. And I didn't get out right away. I sat with the engine running, heart not racing, but aware, very aware. After 10 minutes, I stepped out. The cold hit harder than I remembered. I crossed the street slowly. No one answered the door when I knocked. Just as I turned to leave, the door opened behind me. "You're Deborah?" the woman asked. She couldn't have been more than 25. Blonde ponytail, oversized hoodie. She looked down at her phone, then back up at me, unimpressed. "They said you weren't coming back." "They?" I asked, not moving. "Mara and Vernon, your parents." I didn't say anything, didn't ask why they were telling strangers I'd vanished. "They said you had some stuff to pick up but wouldn't stay, that the place overwhelmed you." I looked past her into the hallway. The walls were still beige, but the pictures were different. No trace of the gallery I once built. Snapshots from travel, one of me standing beside the "sold" sign in the front yard. I thanked her, turned, and walked back down the steps. Before I reached the curb, she called after me. "Oh, there's a letter for you on the porch table. They asked me to leave it out." I didn't answer, just turned, picked it up, and walked away. In my car, I opened it. The envelope said, "Deborah," in my mother's looping cursive. Inside was a single sheet of stationery from the old family desk. Family decisions are complicated. We all have to make sacrifices sometimes. I hope in time you understand we acted out of love. This house has always belonged to all of us. No apology, no ownership, just justification. I drove to the park across from the post office, parked, and got out. There was a trash can next to the bench. I lit the corner of the letter with a match I found in the glove box and let it burn. No theatrics. Just watched until the flame reached my fingers and I dropped it, the ash dissolving before it even landed. Later that afternoon, I drove to Callan's. He was out of town, but I still had a spare key, one of the only people I trusted with that. He always said, "Keys mean nothing if you're not welcome," and he'd never needed to say it twice. Inside, I dropped my bag by the couch and wandered into the guest room. The light was soft, the kind that makes you think maybe nothing's urgent. I pulled out a bin of old files I'd brought when I left home after college, a box I hadn't touched in years. It was mostly tax returns and school papers, but near the bottom, beneath an envelope of baby pictures, I saw it. A cream envelope, no stamp, no address, just my name in thick handwriting, Grandma's. I hadn't seen her handwriting since the funeral. I sat down slowly, holding it like it might shatter. The flap wasn't sealed. Inside was a folded note on yellowed paper. If you ever feel like they've forgotten you, remember this. You were never invisible to me. This home you've built is yours, Deborah. You don't owe anyone your peace. You don't have to stay small to make others comfortable. I didn't cry right away. It came soft, just a warm blur in my vision, like the body finally catching up with what the heart already knew. That night, I made tea and sat on the floor with my laptop. I created a new folder called Deborah vs. Family, Evidence. Inside went PDFs of the deed, mortgage statements, every screenshot I had of conversations that showed I lived there, paid for everything, maintained the place alone. They had tried to replace me, but now I wasn't just reclaiming the house. I was reclaiming the version of me they'd tried to rewrite. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about clarity. I wasn't just going to get my house back. I was going to get the whole story back, too. The deeper I looked into their lies, the clearer it became. They didn't want me removed from the house. They wanted me removed from the story altogether. But that realization didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, like rot behind a perfect coat of paint. And it started, really, with that dinner, 2 months ago. I'd spent an entire weekend preparing, scrubbing baseboards, organizing the silverware drawer like Mom used to, placing name cards on the table. I'd even brought out the china set I inherited from Grandma. I had to wipe off dust from plates no one had touched in over a decade. I thought that maybe, just maybe, a real meal in the home I'd built would show them, not to impress, but to belong. The evening sunlight filtered through the blinds when they arrived. Vera walked in first, as usual, adjusting her scarf and making no comment on the soft jazz I'd put on or the smell of roasted chicken filling the air. Isolde followed, wearing those pointed-toe boots she only wore when she wanted to be seen. She glanced at the table and gave a tight smile like she'd walked into a showroom instead of her sister's home. Vernon stepped in last, looking around with eyes that didn't see detail, just ownership. He nodded once and mumbled, "Nice space." Then, "Feels a bit big for one person." I smiled, tight-lipped. "It's manageable." They sat down without waiting to be invited. We made it through the salad mostly in silence. Every so often, someone would shift the salt shaker or readjust their napkin, but no one asked me about work or the promotion I'd gotten 2 weeks prior or the artwork on the wall that I'd painted myself. When I brought out the main course, Isolde tilted her head and said, "You don't really decorate like someone who plans to stay, do you?" It stung more than it should have. Vera chuckled lightly. She always liked temporary things. Remember when she painted her room black in high school? I didn't reply. I just returned to the kitchen, pretending to check on the bread that didn't need checking. When I came back, Vernon was folding his napkin neatly beside his untouched glass. "Well," he said, standing, "we should let you rest. It's a lot of house to manage after all." And just like that, they left. No compliments, no thank yous, only silence and the soft echo of the door clicking shut behind them. I stood at the table long after they were gone. Not because I didn't know what to do next, but because I wasn't sure it had even happened. It felt like a performance I'd staged for ghosts. Now, weeks later, standing at the edge of my backyard, I remembered that evening with painful clarity. The dinner wasn't an attempt to reconnect. It was a warning. I stayed hidden in the alleyway behind the house, keeping to the shadows. The new tenants, or squatters, depending on how I decided to frame them legally, were inside. I could hear faint laughter from the kitchen window. I moved around back, to the small garden plot I'd created the summer after Grandma passed. I had planted a rose bush there, a specific shade of soft coral that reminded me of the lipstick she always wore. She'd told me once it was her favorite flower, and every year since it bloomed right before her birthday, except now it was gone. In its place stood a plastic bird bath surrounded by white gravel. The soil had been dug out completely, no trace of the bush. No root, no tag, no memory. They didn't even bother to cover the rawness of the spot. It was as if nothing meaningful had ever existed there. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture, titled the file, "They Erase Everything," and sent it to myself. I didn't cry. I didn't even fume. I simply stood there, cataloging the loss, like a museum archivist preserving what little history remained before it was whitewashed entirely. This wasn't about space. It never had been. It was about control. Who controlled the version of reality we all agreed to accept? And in their version, I had no place, no roots, no rosebush. I turned away and headed back to the car. The wind picked up just enough to make the back gate creak behind me. They didn't want dinner. They wanted to remind me who they thought still owned the house. The next morning, I pulled into the driveway just after 8. The autumn air was sharp, carrying a kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful, just empty. My hand reached for the familiar ring of keys, still clipped to the side of my bag. I tried not to think about the last time I used them. I stepped up to the door, slid the key into the lock, and twisted. Nothing. I tried again. Jiggled it. Pulled the door toward me, like that would make a difference. Still nothing. I looked down. The welcome mat was different. Brighter, with a scripted, "Home is where the heart is," embroidered across it in cursive. It wasn't mine. Neither was the new planter with fake succulents hanging beside it. I rang the doorbell. A moment later, footsteps. Then the door opened. A young woman I didn't recognize blinked at me through the screen. "You're Deborah?" she asked, already sounding bored. "Yes." She shifted her weight, glanced down at her phone, then looked back at me. "They told me you weren't coming back, that you moved out, for your mental health." There it was again, that phrase. "They?" "Vera and Vernon," she said. "Your folks." I stepped back, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want to say what I really felt. That I wanted to push the door wide open, walk past her, and reclaim what was already mine. Instead, I nodded once, turned, and walked away without saying another word. I didn't go home, because apparently I couldn't. Instead, I went to Callan's, let myself in with the spare key, sat on the edge of his kitchen counter with a coffee I didn't drink. That afternoon, I started digging through old emails. I was looking for anything, maybe a bank notice I missed, maybe a message from Isolde pretending to check in, but really checking my location. What I found was worse. It was a screenshot, accidentally included in a forwarded chain from our aunt, titled "Family Forever." A group chat. I wasn't in it, but Vera, Isolde, Ryan, and their attorney were. The most recent message was from 3 weeks ago. She leaves for work by 8:10, move in midweek, followed by, "She never locks the back door. We're fine." My throat tightened. I scrolled further. A picture of my living room, my rug, my couch. Only now, there were new throw pillows, a baby swing, and someone else's boots by the door. They hadn't just taken the space. They'd practiced, planned. I closed the laptop, breathing slow, calculated breaths. An hour later, I called my mother. She answered on the third ring. "Deborah," she said, voice flat. "You moved in without my permission," I said. My tone wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. "We were always going to. This house was never meant for just one person, honey. You know that. It belongs to the family. You mean to you, I corrected. A pause, then, we were worried about you. You've always been impulsive. No, I said firmly. I've always been clear. You just never liked hearing it. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. I just said what needed to be said. This is your final warning, I told her. The next message will come from a lawyer. Then I hung up. That evening, I walked into the FedEx store off Lincoln Avenue. The girl behind the counter didn't even blink when I asked to print 30 pages of legal documents. I handed her a flash drive, watched her open each file: title deed, mortgage contract, notarized payment records. Callan met me outside 10 minutes later, coffee in one hand, his expression steady. I need a witness, I told him. For what? I handed him the envelope. To watch me take back what's mine, officially. He didn't ask more, just nodded. They took the house like it was a family heirloom. They forgot the deed had my name on it. By Thursday morning, I was back at the motel. The little window unit rattled in the corner, trying to pretend it was enough for the whole room. I sat on the bed, legs crossed, laptop open. My coffee had gone cold, but I hadn't touched it in 20 minutes. I was staring at my credit report. 2 new accounts, one at a department store I hadn't stepped foot in since college. The other, a personal loan from a lender based in Oregon. Both opened in my name, both using my social security number. But the listed address wasn't mine anymore. It was the house, my house. I clicked on the application details. Email contact, isolde.whitmorefamily@gmail.com. Subtle as a billboard. I leaned back, heart beating not with fear, but with clarity. I remembered the conversation with Mom 2 years ago. You should send over your social for the accountant, she had said over brunch. He needs it for something tax-related, just to cross-check. We're trying to simplify everything for the family trust. And like a fool, I had sent it, a scanned copy, clean and official, right from my work printer. Dad had followed up the next day, asking for a recent W-2 to make sure your records match ours. I didn't even question it. That's the thing with betrayal. It never walks in with a sign. It comes wearing the old familiar jacket of someone you trusted. That afternoon, I stopped by Callan's place to pick up some mail he'd been holding for me. We talked briefly in his driveway, sun just beginning to lower behind the trees. You all right? He asked, handing me a manila envelope. No, I said, but I'm getting clear. He nodded, sensing I wasn't there for small talk. Inside the envelope was something I didn't expect, a USB drive. There's something on that you should hear, he said. It came from someone who used to do business with your dad. Apparently, he recorded more than just numbers. I took it back to the motel and plugged it into my laptop. It took a minute to load. The audio was scratchy, like it had been pulled from a meeting held in a basement somewhere, but the voice, unmistakable. Vernon, my father. If she pushes back, that's fine, his voice crackled. Once she's out, change the locks. Shift everything gradually. She'll call a lawyer, but by then, the narrative is ours. Silence followed, and then a faint chuckle. Not his, but someone else's. A woman's, likely Isolde's. She'll cry first, then she'll fold. I sat still, hands resting flat on the table. I didn't replay it out of disbelief. I replayed it to make sure every syllable was captured, every syllable I would need in court. That evening, I composed an email to my attorney. The subject line was short: criminal intent, documented. I attached 3 files, the audio, a PDF of the credit report, and a zipped folder titled Past Correspondence, SSN W2. In the body, I typed only one sentence: they've crossed a line I can't ignore. Let's escalate. I clicked send. Then I closed the laptop and let myself exhale, long and slow. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't hurt. I was focused. For the first time, the chaos felt like evidence. The manipulation was becoming measurable, quantifiable. They'd expected me to scream. I'd rather file. That night, I pulled out a legal pad and began drafting a witness statement. Not to send right away, but to prepare. It wasn't theatrical, it was factual. Dates, accounts, conversations, timeline, intent. I included everything: the dinner, the key no longer fitting, the credit theft, the voice recording, the family group chat I had never been invited to. I noted how they referred to me in emails: the unstable one, the burden, the temporary problem. They used my name to break me. I'll use the truth to end them. It had rained the night before. The alley behind the house was still damp, the pavement darkened with leftover puddles and fallen leaves stuck in clumps along the fence line. I parked a block over, walking with a purposeful quietness toward the back gate, the same gate I had once painted white by hand. Now the paint was chipped and the latch hung crooked. I wasn't there to reclaim anything, not yet. I just needed to retrieve an old file cabinet I'd stored in the detached shed. I had tucked it behind tarps months ago, thinking I'd return for it when the timing felt less radioactive. As I moved past the trash bins stacked beside the fence, something caught my eye. A frame. Wooden. Familiar. I stepped closer, heart already preparing for what my mind hadn't accepted yet. There it was. A photo of me at 10 years old, standing between Mom and Dad in front of our old house, missing a front tooth and beaming like I had no idea how fragile families really were. Across my face, in thick red marker, someone had drawn an X. Not a slip, not a spill, a deliberate cross. Right through me. For a second, I couldn't move. I didn't feel anger first. I felt nausea. Who takes a child's photo and mutilates it like that? I reached down, lifted the frame slowly, and held it under the gray morning light. The glass was cracked in one corner. Dirt smudged the edges, but the X, that was fresh. I took a picture of it with my phone, then slipped the photo out of the frame and slid it into a folder I carried in my bag. Later that afternoon, I was back at Callan's, trying to make sense of where lines between betrayal and pathology blurred. As I organized new files into labeled folders, an email pinged from my attorney. No subject line, just a forwarded audio file. In the message thread below, the receptionist wrote, "Sorry, this got copied to your client by mistake, but it's public record now." I clicked the audio file. It was a voicemail, and I knew the voice instantly. Vera. "She's always had some emotional issues, don't you think?" she said in her syrupy tone. "We just want to make sure the house is in safe hands, especially if something goes wrong. We're not trying to take anything. We just can't watch her spiral again." Spiral. She'd made it sound like I was an unstable tenant in her life story, someone who might accidentally burn the place down. I played it again, 3 times, saved it in a folder labeled Mental Health Fabrication, Exhibit D. Callan came by that evening with takeout and quiet support. "You should file a restraining order," he said without preamble. "This isn't family dynamics anymore, Deb. This is a campaign." He was right. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I opened my laptop, pulled up the county site, and began writing the motion myself. I had done it enough times in my head. Now it just needed formatting. 3 days later, I stood at the courthouse clerk's counter with 2 copies of everything. Notarized statements, financial records, the voice recording, the vandalized photo, the voicemail to the doctor, the group chat logs. They hadn't just tried to take my home. They were trying to take the version of me that was sane, capable, stable. I wouldn't let them. As I turned from the clerk's window, I ran directly into Isolde. She was holding a Starbucks cup, all confidence and cream coat. "You're making this dramatic," she said, lifting an eyebrow. "You always did." "No," I said, stepping past her. "I'm making it legal." She laughed under her breath. "You always needed a stage." I didn't answer. Her words were dust by then. That night, I pulled every piece of paper I had and reorganized the folders. I printed duplicates of all digital evidence. I labeled every section as if I were preparing to present to a grand jury. They thought they could delete me. I was making myself unerasable. And then, as if fate needed a final punctuation mark, I opened my inbox just before midnight. There it was. An email from Vera. But it wasn't meant for me. It was meant for her lawyer. Subject line: urgent. Remove Deborah before she files. The message came in at 12:03 a.m. I hadn't been asleep, just lying there in the dark, watching the motel ceiling shift with shadows from the parking lot lights. My laptop chimed quietly from the table across the room. I rolled over and clicked the trackpad without much thought. The subject line hit me like a slap. Urgent. Remove her first. It was from Vera. The body was short. She's escalating. If she files first, we lose our window. I need you to act now. Keep the story consistent. Mental health, financial instability, whatever sticks. I'll handle Isolde. No greeting, no sign-off, just tactical instructions, like I wasn't her daughter, but a problem to be deleted from a spreadsheet. She'd meant to send it to her attorney. Instead, it came to me. I stared at the screen until the cursor stopped blinking. There was no rush of anger, no gasp, no fists clenched, just a strange, cold certainty, like the moment before a storm hits, but you're already inside the house. At 12:06, I opened my inbox and forwarded the message to my attorney. Subject: it's time. I attached everything. The voicemail to the doctor, the red X photo, the credit report, the deed, and now, this final nail. By 8:42 a.m., I had a response. "We're filing for a full injunction today. Protective order, emergency hearing. You're covered, Deborah." I exhaled. Finally. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Nancy Mitchell, an old family friend who still volunteered at Mom's church. She didn't say hello. "Deborah, I don't know what's going on, but your mother's name was just removed from the community board. She's not leading the winter donation drive anymore." Pause. Someone leaked an email. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. The war wasn't just legal anymore. It was public. After the call, I opened a new folder on my laptop and titled it Proof of Pattern. Inside, I began cataloging timelines, not just for the judge, for me. That afternoon, I sat in the corner of the courthouse, ankle crossed over my knee, fingers resting quietly on my file folder. Vera entered the courtroom with Isolde trailing her like a nervous PR assistant. Their lawyer walked ahead like he was headed into a boardroom, not a legal confrontation over property and psychological warfare. They sat across from me. Vera didn't look at me directly, but she didn't avoid me either. She wore that same navy blazer she used for funerals. She was trying to appear composed, responsible, motherly. The judge called the hearing to order. My attorney spoke first, submitting the documents in order, Exhibits A through H. When the judge read the subject line of the leaked email aloud, Vera flinched. That was the only moment she cracked. She didn't cry, she didn't defend herself, because now she couldn't. The evidence wasn't about emotion, it was undeniable. At 11:14 a.m., the judge granted the protective order. Vera and Isolde were to vacate the property within 72 hours. They were prohibited from contacting me directly. All communication would go through attorneys until the full trial. No celebratory music played as I walked down the courthouse steps. No reporters. No fist pumps. Just a long breath. One I hadn't let myself take since the first insult was wrapped in a soft chuckle at that dinner table months ago. That night, back at the motel, I sat on the bed and looked around. Same rattling air unit, same lamp with the crooked shade. But for the first time, I wasn't bracing for impact. Justice doesn't always feel like a victory lap. Sometimes it's just enough to finally sleep without wondering which lie they'll use next. The house was mine, but the air still smelled like her perfume. By Christmas morning, the house was mine again, not just in paperwork, but in presence. There were no lawyers left to call. No more voicemails from Vera or court notices stuffed into my mailbox. Just me, and this place I had almost surrendered to them, not by force, but by exhaustion. Snow had dusted the roof overnight, and from the kitchen window, the street shimmered in silence. No tire tracks, no kids on bikes, just gray skies and unbroken stillness. I padded across the hardwood floor in wool socks, the wood smooth and cool underfoot. It creaked differently now, not under tension, but in rhythm. There were traces of them that hadn't faded yet. In the closet, I still found one of Isolde's scarves tangled in a drawer. In the hall, a faint trace of my mother's perfume lingered near the light switch, something synthetic and floral, the kind of scent that pretended to be gentle. I didn't rush to scrub them out. Instead, I lit a candle. It had once belonged to Vera, an expensive one she insisted only be lit on meaningful occasions. This morning felt like one, though not in the way she would have defined it. The flame flickered steadily. I didn't look at it like a symbol. I didn't need symbolism anymore. I just needed warmth. By noon, I was standing in the living room with a hammer and nail. I had a photo in hand, not of them, not of us. It was a picture of me, alone, at 30, standing in front of this very house the day I closed on it. My smile was uneven, my eyes tired but proud. I hung it above the mantel. Next, I went outside, clipped away the plastic sculpture they'd placed where my grandmother's rosebush used to be, and planted fresh lavender. The soil was cold, but the motion soothed something in me. I whispered her name under my breath as I covered the roots. Inside, I emptied the drawer that used to be filled with legal threats and now filled it with something mundane: paint samples, fabric swatches, coupons for curtain rods. I liked the ordinariness of it, proof that life could be rebuilt with small, boring choices. That afternoon, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address, but the envelope gave it away. I opened it at the kitchen table, hands steady. "I shouldn't have let it get this far," it began. "I was trying to protect what I built. I didn't realize how much of it was yours." No apology, no ownership, just enough distance to pretend it had all been unfortunate misunderstandings. It was the kind of message meant to reset a narrative, not repair a wound. I folded it once and placed it in a drawer I labeled, "For record, not emotion." I said out loud, to no one, "Some doors don't need to be slammed. They just don't need to be opened again." The next morning, I hosted brunch. Callan came early, bringing a warm tray of cinnamon rolls. My neighbor across the street stopped by with cranberry muffins. Nora, the woman who'd once watched my mother humiliate me from her front porch without saying a word, came too, this time carrying a bottle of wine and an apology tucked into her eyes. The house filled with the sound of small talk, laughter, silverware clinking on plates. I didn't lead every conversation. I didn't have to. I was just there, present, still, whole. As people left, they hugged longer than usual. They lingered at the door, thanking me in tones that meant more than just politeness. They weren't sorry for what had happened, but they were glad I was still standing. By dusk, the house was quiet again. I washed the last dish by hand, dried it, set it back in the cabinet. Then I stood by the front window, the candle still glowing beside me. I could see my breath faintly against the glass. Sometimes, what we call family is just shared blood. What we call peace is knowing you no longer need to ask them to see you. They tried to take my house, but they couldn't take the woman who built it. Some families don't shatter with a single betrayal. They chip away at you slowly until one day you realize you've been replaced in your own story. If you've ever been made to feel small to keep someone else comfortable, this story was for you. Have you ever had to fight for something that was already yours? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more true emotional stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe. There's so much more to uncover.